The following program is made possible in part by the Dayton Bar Association.
Swillinger. I'm an attorney in the Dayton area, and I welcome you. I'm the host, and they tell me I'm the producer of the show. This is my fourth show. Many of you might be familiar with Mike Monta, the gentleman who was the host and producer for the last approximately 26 years. Mike has taken some time away from the program this year, so this is my fourth show, and I welcome you. The show is live. It's a call-in show. We have had some small issues regarding the streaming. I'm not sure if that's up and running. I would refer those of you who are interested to take a look at the DATV website, Dayton Access Television. Dayton Access Television is the sponsor, along with the the Dayton Bar Association, of this program. There will be pop-ups that come on the screen during the course of the evening here telling you about this program. There's one up on the screen now with the title of tonight's program, or tonight's topic: criminal record barriers, record sealing, expungements, and CQEs, known as Certificates of Qualified Employment. Our guest tonight is Sasha Naiman. Sasha will tell you about herself, where she's employed, and her involvement in this area of the law. Sasha, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your being here. Sasha came up this evening from Cincinnati, where she works and lives, to do this show. She has been doing this type of work for many years and is really committed to helping those who have criminal records and helping them have a second chance in life after getting convicted, having a record, and finding that there are some impediments, some serious impediments at times, to getting that next job or that first job once the conviction has come about. So Sasha, I'll turn to you this evening. Again, I welcome you. Our topic for this evening, as I've said, is barriers to employment. So Sasha has been very kind and provided me with an outline tonight to help us with our discussion. So I would like to start at this point with talking about the impact of criminal records, and the good news that it appears that there are some opportunities now to help people in a way that have not been available before, to assist people in the community with criminal records, be it a misdemeanor or a felony, the limitations upon that, and we'll get into the details now. Sasha, what is a criminal record? What impact does a criminal record have on individuals? And we'll kind of jump off from there and move forward.
Great. Well, thank you. So this is really important. Do you want me to tell a little bit about me?
Tell you a little bit. I jumped ahead of myself.
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm an attorney and the deputy director at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. OJPC is a nonprofit public interest law firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the mission of OJPC is to create a fair, intelligent, redemptive criminal justice system. OJPC has been working for over 20 years with people who have had criminal justice system involvement. Part of the work is to help folks who are incarcerated, and part of the work is to help folks who are out in the community. And they're looking for jobs and for housing, to reunify with family members, to go back to school, all of the same things that any of us want in life. But they're facing some barriers because of the criminal records from their past. And part of OJPC's work is something called the Second Chance Project. And the Second Chance Project serves about 400 people per year to help remove criminal records barriers. So you'd asked, what impact does a criminal record have? And this is a really great question because in Ohio, we have 1 in 3 people with a criminal record.
Can we talk first, just include in your explanation, just to clarify, what is a criminal record? Is it a minor misdemeanor? Is it a misdemeanor, a felony? What could it be as part of explaining what you're doing?
Absolutely. So a criminal record can be a record of any time that a person has had contact with the justice system. Depends on the type of background check what will come up in your criminal record. But a criminal record can include your non-convictions, so times that a person was arrested and then the case was dismissed. The person was maybe found not guilty. It wasn't them at all. The case got ignored. They never even had to go to court. Well, those records still exist associated with their name. So those non-convictions are criminal records. Convictions are criminal records. So we are talking about felonies and misdemeanors, but also minor misdemeanors. In Ohio, there's a lot of things that can just be ticketed. A weed ticket, an open flask, after hours in parks. People pay those off and then may not realize that that actually becomes a part of their criminal record. In some instances, sealed records, and we'll talk more about what that means, and juvenile records can come up on a background check that tests criminal records. Criminal records can be from the state you're in, so from Ohio. They can be from another state. They can be federal. So there's all different sorts of records, and depending on the type of background check you're getting, different parts of that criminal record can show up.
Okay.
So when I said 1 in 3 people have a criminal record, that's any kind of record. 1 in 6 people in Ohio have a record for a felony or a misdemeanor conviction. So we're talking about a huge portion of the population. What that record does is prevents them from having full access to employment, to housing, volunteer opportunities. In Ohio, there are over 1,000 laws that restrict what a person with a criminal record can do. Actually, OJPC has a database online called Civic, and if somebody goes to Civic Ohio, CIVICCOHIO.org, they can type in a record. So for example, a person might have had a burglary. They type in burglary and out will pop over 600 barriers that impact that person. That's 600 parts of Ohio law that will limit where they can live or work, volunteer, sometimes even what kind of pet a person can have if they're trying to have some kind of wild animal. But I say it only because it's so massive, the impact. And in addition to these collateral consequences, these limits in the law, there's just a stigma. It impacts a person because applying to a job with a criminal record means you're 50% less likely to get a call back. It means that if you do get a job, if you've been incarcerated, you're going to make 40% less on average. So this permeates into a person's life.
And sometimes I've seen where people are then faced with a dilemma, people applying for the job. Do I tell the employer in my interview or do I not tell them that I have a criminal record? And they think it's better not to, and they don't. There's a background check. The employer says, gee, I'd really like to have hired you, but you didn't trust me enough to tell me you had this record, and so forth. On the other hand, I understand why people don't do that, and they just hope that they can prove themselves and that the issue never comes up, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma.
Well, now background checks are so widely accessible. Here in the Dayton area, most of the courts, Dayton Municipal, Kettering, Vandalia, they're going to have websites. And on those websites, you can often just search a person's name and date of birth, and out will pop their records. Free searches. So for an employer or a landlord or an education program, it's becoming easier and easier.
And you pointed out another context. You're not just applying for a job or either a paying job or a volunteer position. You're applying for an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody does a background check. Or you're applying for credit for a loan.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody does a background check. So, and it's more available than not.
That's right.
Okay.
I've had people who have come into the Second Chance Legal Clinics for all kinds of barriers. One woman came in and she brings in her boyfriend, says, my dad does a background check on every person that I date. And I'll tell you, she wasn't the first person to come in where the criminal records might be creating relationship barriers. Mm-hmm. I've had clients who want to volunteer at their child's school, and there was a barrier there just to come to the school Thanksgiving party and to set up the tables. So it really is at every level.
I've seen that, and that's why I guess I'm encouraged by some of what you're going to be talking about tonight in terms of changes in this second chance realm. So statistics, we talked about employment, perceptions, collateral consequences, what can show up, what types of things can show up. You mentioned a variety of convictions and non-convictions, but more specifically even something such as juvenile records that you might think would not be available because you were a juvenile.
Yeah.
How does that come up?
There are certain jobs where people get fingerprinted. And usually those are jobs for childcare, healthcare, working with vulnerable populations, high security like casinos, banks, airports. And those background checks, they're BCI or FBI background checks.
Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
Yes, right. Bureau of Criminal Investigation for Ohio, FBI nationally. They fingerprint. They give fingerprint results for every applicant for those kinds of jobs, and those searches go deeper. Those searches are allowed to show certain juvenile records for certain positions or professional licenses, and certain sealed offenses, which many courts call expunged, but generally it means sealed offenses, they can still come up on those fingerprint checks.
Yes, I came to learn some time ago that it was very difficult to tell a client once you've gone through this process and you received an order from the court that your record is either sealed or you've received an expungement, or maybe the order says both, that there is no certainty, particularly in today's world,
Yes.
With the technology that we have and so forth. So, okay. I guess why don't we move to what now we can do about it in today's world? In so much as there have been some changes. I seem to recall, I may have the date wrong, but at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, there were some changes that went into effect relative to possibly giving folks second chances. That may have been the time the CQEs came into play. And then now, in 2018, we have some new laws. So
yeah. So
tell us about that.
There's a lot that a person can do now in Ohio if they're facing barriers from criminal records. There's record sealing, which you're right, was initially limited to first-time offenders. You could have only been in trouble once. Then in 2012, 2013, around that time, record sealing got expanded. And then in 2018, it got completely blown much larger. And so record sealing is one option, and we should talk about each one in detail. Expungement is another option. Expungement was very limited until 2018, where that got expanded. And then there's CQEs, the Certificates of Qualification for Employment, and there's also pardons. 2018 was a really big year. It was a year where the laws allowed for much broader record sealing, broader expungement, and broader CQE eligibility. So many Ohioans who before just were not able to apply for these tools can now remove the barriers that their criminal records create.
Before we go on, we've talked about this in other contexts on the previous shows, that while this show may be seen by people outside the state of Ohio, or not, the points of law that you're discussing this evening, you're approaching from the vantage point of being in Ohio. The laws may be different. The laws regarding the statutes regarding record sealing or expungements, or whether there are CQEs even permitted. So I would just say, I would caution people who might be watching this show from outside of Ohio that it's important that they need to check with an attorney should they wish to pursue some type of effort to overcome some barrier, for instance, to employment, and see whether these are available in their state. Is that a fair?
That's absolutely right. If you have a record in Ohio, Ohio laws apply. And even so, no matter what we say here, a person should consult an attorney.
Right.
Because this is not legal advice.
Absolutely.
But if you have a record in Kentucky or Indiana or Florida, then Kentucky or Indiana or Florida law apply. If you have a federal record, federal law applies. So here we're just going to be talking about the changes in Ohio law that impact people who have the record in Ohio.
And yet being mindful at the same time of what you also said earlier, that a record in another state could come into play when looking
That's right.
at your eligibility for record
Absolutely.
sealing, expungement, CQE, or pardon in Ohio.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, please, if you would. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just,
No, that's right. That's right.
okay. So what can we do about it? You were talking about 4 different areas where this is addressed. Can we drill down a little bit on what record sealing is and how it addresses non-convictions, convictions, what it's limited to, how it might differ from expungement? And as you said earlier, I know lawyers, and probably yours truly, over the years would have used those terms interchangeably. And obviously they are not interchangeable. So
Yeah. So record sealing means that a record gets taken out of the main file and figuratively or literally put into a locked box, and only certain people have the key to that box. A sealed record doesn't disappear. It becomes hidden from most eyes. There's instances in which some employers might be able to run that fingerprint background check, and depending on the type of job and the type of offense, they might get the key to that locked box. The courts are allowed to look, but for the most part, a sealed record, it's hidden. A landlord can't see it, a school can't see it, your neighbor can't look it up on the public website. For the vast majority of jobs, it's essentially not there anymore. Now, expungement, true expungement as defined in the law, obliterates the record. It just doesn't exist. All electronic forms are erased, all physical forms are erased. In most instances, when people say expungement, they're actually talking about sealing. Expungement in Ohio is reserved for juvenile records, survivors of sex trafficking, and there's one specific gun charge during a specific time that can be expunged. So unless you're talking about those 3 instances, we're actually talking about sealing, which is a really great tool. It's just important to note that sealed records can still be accessed by the courts and some employers and licensing, professional licensing boards.
now, just before you move on, what is, when you say it's put into a box, and I know that's somewhat actual and somewhat metaphorical in terms of how you were describing that, but are you saying in the courthouse it might be locked up in the courthouse where the disposition of the case occurred? And that's where it would be locked up. Would it be potentially locked up at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles if you had something sent up by the court to the Bureau and then you filed for your record to be sealed? Might the Bureau of Motor Vehicles be the depository, if that's the right word, for your conviction? Because I think people would say, well, where's this box? Okay, so.
So when you seal a record, and actually traffic convictions can't be sealed, so it kind of takes the Bureau of Motor Vehicles out. But right, depends on the situation. The clerk of courts will contact the police, will contact sheriff's office. There's usually a list of government-related agencies that they contact, and all of those agencies are supposed to answer that no record exists unless they're being asked by the courts, police, or certain employers in certain circumstances. So the box theoretically exists in many different buildings, and all of them are supposed to consider it sealed to the extent that the criminal case occurred.
Okay, and that's set by statute?
Yes.
As to where it can be, who can see it, who can't?
That's right.
Or really just who can?
Right.
And, okay.
Now, if there is a parallel non-criminal proceeding, for example, if there is a JFS, a child services investigation, which is in parallel but in many ways separate from the criminal charge for child endangering, if you seal the non-conviction for child endangering, it doesn't mean that the JFS investigation and the administrative record is then automatically sealed. Or if you have a civil case, meaning two individuals are suing each other, that might be in parallel to a criminal case. So if I got into a fight with somebody, they might be suing me for some damages. There might also be a criminal case. those are separate. So when I talk about sealing of criminal cases, I'm just talking about that criminal world. And it may take a deeper dive with an individual to see in their case if there are certain other pieces that then don't disappear. If they talked to a newspaper or if a newspaper profiled their story, sealing the criminal case doesn't do anything for the Google search. But in most instances, that criminal case tends to be its own whole situation.
Well, you raised a very good point. I don't want to miss that. If it gets on to the internet, such as one of the drop-downs on Google,
Yes.
It's my understanding that it's very difficult to get that removed. And I'm sure that there are companies that do that, just that, and they help people get that removed. But it's important to understand you can go through all the steps to get it sealed or expunged, but if it's already out there on that, you have to be mindful of that also. Is that what you're saying?
It depends,
Okay.
which is the quintessential lawyer answer. It
Well.
depends. If there is a criminal background check website, so that clerk of court's website that I was talking about that might belong to Dayton Municipal, or a private background checker, backgroundchecks.com, Mugshot's website, whatever it is, if it is a background check agency, they're actually governed by a federal law, FCRA, and as soon as you get it sealed, they are supposed to remove it, and if they don't, then, well, first of all, you go to them and say remove it, and then they generally do, and then you might have some recourse if they've messed up your job opportunity by not doing a diligent job of removing sealed records. But if there's a newspaper, that's not a background check agency. A newspaper might write a story about a person who was arrested. That newspaper doesn't have to retract the article. So my depends just means a background check company does have to remove a sealed record. They do, and there's quite a few protections for that. Sometimes they don't do a good job, and then we have to make sure that they do a good job. It's something to be wary of. I warn our clients that they should always, if they're being background checked, if they've had sealed records, ask for a copy to verify that it's correct. But there's a lot of protections there. If the person chooses to tell their story publicly, or somebody chooses to tell their story publicly through something like a blog post or a Facebook post, there's no undoing that.
As a former colleague of mine said, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, record sealing?
Record sealing.
All right.
And now,
Well, let me talk a little bit about record sealing.
okay. Go ahead.
Sealing can happen for both convictions and non-convictions. To seal a non-conviction, the rule is that a person needs to be off papers or have no cases that are currently open or pending. And as long as they're off papers, there's nothing else going on, generally they can remove the non-convictions. There tends to be no cost for this. Usually there's no waiting period. In some limited cases, there might be a 2-year waiting period.
I'm going to stop you for a second. We have a caller, first one of the evening here. If you'd like to put them through, and we'll get back to our record sealing discussion. Go ahead, please. Good evening.
How you doing? My name is Kenneth, and I just happened to turn to the station, and I see you guys talking about something that's really serious. First off, I'm a single father. I've had my son full-time for about going on 5 years, full-time. But one thing that I needed to deal with was the expungement of my record. When I went to court in Dayton to try to get an expungement, at the time, it was sad. First off, because there was a lady there who was trying to get her record expunged. And her record was back in like 1980. And they wouldn't expunge her record. And I knew mine wasn't going to get expunged. I was like, wow. So then I got up there, and what was holding my felonies was I only had one felonies for drug possession. I never went to jail or anything like that. Did any time except probation. I did my probation. I was on probation like 6 months, but it was sentenced to like 5 years, but I was out for 6 months because I was blessed to work. And like I am today, I still work. I've been not really having a lot of issues with that because of my integrity and the way that I deal with things. But for people in my situation, where the misdemeanor that was with the felony kept me from getting the expungement. So with the second chance, is that something that's going to be able, because it was obstructing justice with the possession. And to even, I'm not going to go through the whole case because the whole thing was, at the time, was kind of, I was young and a lot of things went over my head that maybe should have came up. But as soon as the possession happened, the situation, it just, that's how it was. It was, you know, you got a felony now. So with this second chance, is that going to help me to be able to get an expungement, or should I try for a sitting? That's my main thing, and for people to hear that may have that situation.
Let me say two things, and then I'm going to let the expert talk. Number one, thank you for calling in and sharing this. And number two, when you call in and you share this type of story, it's educating other people when you're sharing your experience, and we appreciate that. Now, did you want to add something? Otherwise, I'm going to let our guest try and respond to your question, and then we have another caller on hold. So go ahead,
No,
please.
I don't need to add anything. I just wanted to let you all know that, especially for guys like me who are fathers, full-time fathers, I mean, I take care of my son completely. I've always had. But this is something that's so needed because some of these smaller things have bigger ripples in life. They have the bigger effects, especially with employment. That's one big thing that I heard you guys talking about that earlier. For the better jobs, because they give you some of these jobs, but I'm going to be honest, some of them are like, it's just not even worth it. I'm just being honest. Some of these jobs aren't even worth it. Because then you feel like, okay, this is not helping me. So for people that's in that situation, especially parents too.
Well, let me say this. I'm going to give our guest the opportunity to respond here. And we have at least one other caller on the line, and we have other materials we want to cover. So I don't mean to cut you off. I hope you feel you've had an opportunity to tell us which one to tell us. Go ahead, Sasha.
So Kenneth, first, thank you so much for sharing your story. It rings to me very much of what I've seen happening when people are doing their absolute best and they're working hard. It's just they're trying to move from jobs to careers, or from low wage to living wage to great wage, to create that prosperity for themselves and their family. Record sealing law changed, and I'm going to tell you what is eligible. I can't speak to your specific case because I just don't know the details, so I wouldn't be able to tell you if you're eligible. But I think there's some good news in this answer. So there's two ways for a person to be able to seal their record under the new law. One way is if a person only has one felony and one misdemeanor. So for example, a felony for drug possession and a misdemeanor obstruction, and that's all that they have. Or a person can have two misdemeanor situations. So felony and misdemeanor situation, or two misdemeanor situations. Or of course, just one felony or just one misdemeanor. So if a person's been in trouble no more than 2 times for these kind of situations, once up to a felony, once just misdemeanors, they are what's called an eligible offender for record sealing.
As long as the statute doesn't specifically exclude those offenses from being
So that's
sealed?
actually the second question.
Oh,
First
okay,
is,
okay.
can the person apply? So for a person to be an eligible offender, can you even apply for record sealing? The second question, which is to your point,
Okay.
well, what can they apply for?
I'm sorry.
So a person who's been in trouble just twice, and sometimes you can even clump things together, like things that happen within the same month or same case. But in 2018, that went even further. So now, in addition to a person who's been in trouble twice, a person who has any number of misdemeanors and up to 5 felonies is an eligible offender, as long as none of their cases are felony sex offenses, violent offenses, or felonies 1s, 2s, or 3s. So this is 2 different pathways for eligibility. One is for a person who has just 2 times they've gotten into trouble, and then you can see what they can remove. The other one is for a person with any number of times, as long as they don't have more than 5 felonies, no felony sex offenses, no violent offenses, and no felony 1s, 2s, or 3s. If you fall into one of those 2 categories, have a lawyer look at it. I can't give legal advice here, but if you fall into one of those 2 categories, you're what's called an eligible offender. After that, you are eligible to seal anything on your record except felonies 1s and 2s, certain violent offenses, certain child victim offenses, and then there's DUIs that can't be removed and certain other types of traffic offenses. So if you're an eligible offender, let's say you have a felony 1, drug trafficking, you still can't remove that. Felony 1s and 2s cannot be removed ever, even for eligible offenders. Certain violent offenses, certain sexual offenses, certain child victim offenses. The offense isn't eligible even though the person is. And then there's a waiting period. You have to wait for a certain amount of time after the discharge of the offense. So if you still owe money on the case, you can ask the court to convert it to community service or to close it out in some way. But until that case is fully closed, the waiting period doesn't start. And so generally it's about a year you have to wait for a misdemeanor. There's usually no waiting period for a non-conviction. And then on the felonies, it depends how many you have. It might be 3, 4, or 5 years as the waiting period. It's a really great change in the law. What it means is that a person who has 15 misdemeanors at a time when they were making some bad choices, maybe they had mental health issues that weren't treated, addiction issues, they have these obstructions and these thefts, maybe they have 3 or 4 felony 4 or 5 drug possessions. They can get all of that sealed if they've waited the appropriate amount of time and can show the court that they're rehabilitated and doing well.
Does that help you, sir?
Yes, that helps me a lot. And again, I'm speaking in, like, the time has been long enough. I'm talking 12 to 13 years since all this happened. So the time has been there, but I really appreciate this because it's in Dayton, especially on the west side of Dayton, a lot of things like this are going on. People trying to get their lives together and do the right things, and a lot of them are. But these are triumphant things that people want to do. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Well, we appreciate your call, and thank you so much for calling. I believe we have one caller waiting now. Go ahead. Yes, and they hung up? Okay. Sure. Okay. Hello, good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great information. You're providing a lot of all the spectrum. I don't want to get too much into my details, although I could, but I would say that I did get a professional job with some history. So the reason why I'm asking, why I'm calling tonight, is this seems a bit like mitigating, credit reports and stuff. You don't know what you're getting turned down until you find it. So what can I do in terms of creating a roadmap for my own self in terms of deciding which records I should actively expunge or seal? And just to put it in another perspective, I suppose a lot of people would not call to mitigate this until they know there's really a problem. But what I really want to do is learn how to create a strategy on what best protects myself in terms of my future.
Okay, thank you very much for calling. Good questions. Sasha?
The strategy is you apply to seal anything that you can have sealed. Apply to expunge anything that you can have expunged. All the time I see people who have non-conviction records that get in the way. Maybe they've had only 3 convictions, but there's been 6 other times where they were picked up by police. And a landlord may say, well, you've only been in trouble 3 times, or they may say, it looks like you've been in trouble 9 times. And as long as they don't verbally tell you that they're counting your arrests as convictions, there's not a lot you can do about what goes on in a person's head. Small charges. I've seen people whose records are pretty long ago, 12, 13 years ago, and then they pick up like an open flask, an after hours in park, something really small recently, and now employers are thinking because of that little ticket that they're just the same as they were 12 years ago, that old record reflects them. So the answer is no matter whether you personally think this is going to be the case that makes or breaks your background check, anything that's eligible you apply for, shorten that record down to its absolute minimum or remove it if possible.
Does that help you, sir?
Yeah, it definitely does. It appears that regardless of the state or that it occurred in a jurisdiction, that it should actively protect this at least as aggressively as you would a credit report or anything else that would affect your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and we really appreciate your calling. Do we have another caller right now? No? No other callers right now. Okay, so we'll get back to record sealing. And Sasha, I appreciate your explanations here. And folks, Sasha and I both understand what an important topic this is. And Sasha's really devoted her relatively young career, but in that time she's lived a lot longer career in those, 7 years that you've been in practice, focusing on this type of work. So we know it's very, very important. I hope if other callers call in, we can get to your calls. If we can't, Sasha, may I ask this question? We're going to talk a little bit about what opportunities there might be to reach out for legal services in the Dayton area, but can I first suggest that people go to your website for the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, located in downtown Cincinnati. If you Google Ohio Justice and Policy Center or just OJPC Cincinnati, Ohio, up will come the website. There are a lot of good drop downs, a lot of explanation. Why don't you tell us a little bit more? And then I have a question as part of that. Are there screeners that people can talk to first before they would even talk to an attorney if they get that far?
At OJPC?
Yes.
So OJPC does outreach legal clinics. The best place to get screened is to go to our website and see where our next legal clinic is. We'll be out at different locations around the Cincinnati area multiple times per month. We try to go into the neighborhoods where there's need for this, and in general, just around Cincinnati. And there's attorneys and paralegals who will screen people for eligibility. It's also possible if you have a record, particularly in the Cincinnati area, you can come and schedule an appointment to meet with an attorney or a paralegal. Those outreach clinics are the best way to go, though.
And are those the second chance clinics that are now being overseen by your successor in that regard as you've moved into the deputy director position? Her name is Dorianne Mason.
Dorianne Mason, yes. She is the director of our Second Chance project. She, along with a team of really excellent staff, are doing our Second Chance legal clinics.
Okay.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, please understand that the requests for assistance, as I understand it, far outnumber their ability to get to everything and to at least get to it as timely as maybe you would like in your particular situation. But this is a wonderful organization, just incredible people, their commitment to helping people who are in the positions of our last two callers and people with similar and yet different problems related to what we're talking about this evening.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we get back, in the absence of another caller at the moment, why don't we get back to record sealing? And I would tell Sasha that we've got about 17 minutes left. I never hear him do this on TV shows, but I do it. So I want you to know as we kind of go through the remaining topics that we have. And in the absence of any callers calling in, I'll let you go through the outline that you prepared because I want to get as much of this out there for the public as possible. By the way, that's the number for call-ins this evening. There should also be information coming across the screen for the lawyer referral service of the Dayton Bar Association. You can call 222-7902 to get to that number, and we'll mention some other resources hopefully at the end of the show that might be available in addition to your seeking the assistance of private attorneys, but that might come through the lawyer referral service of the Dayton Bar Association. Sasha.
All right. So for record sealing, the last thing I will say is the application goes to the court in which the case happened. So if you have cases in multiple courts, you're going to have to file multiple record sealing applications to those courts. There is a filing fee of $50 in the court for the convictions. And it's important to know that can be waived. So if a person is not employed or underemployed, maybe has children they're taking care of, so they can't afford the $50, they should ask for a filing fee waiver. And once the case is sealed, it should come off of any public background check, any private background check, like backgroundchecks.com and so on, and any of those online public checks. If somebody calls the courthouse has to say there's nothing there. But like I said, those fingerprint searches could still reveal sealed convictions. So in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about expungements.
Okay,
Great.
go ahead.
So expungements in Ohio, generally we see that with juvenile records. If a person has a juvenile record, they absolutely should apply for expungement in the court where that record is. Expungement is a complete erasing of the record. And like I said, sometimes juvenile records can come up on adult background checks. Courts can see juvenile records sometimes, so you don't want that coming up in case you do have contact with the justice system as an adult. If possible, contact the juvenile court where it happened and find a way to completely erase it. That can usually happen some years after a person stops being a juvenile. For adult records, there is a form of expungement that's really important. It's fairly new in Ohio. It just really got kicked off in 2012. There's expungement for survivors of trafficking became a thing. And now in 2018, there's this full expungement opportunity. If a person was a victim of human trafficking, meaning that they were involved in prostitution and there might have been a boyfriend, family member, landlord, pimp, drug dealer who was controlling or manipulating the situation, maybe making them feel scared or intimidating them in some way. If that person has criminal records that came out of that situation, drug records, obstruction records, theft records, certainly prostitution, soliciting kinds of records, those can be completely erased. The rule for this kind of expungement is the person has to have been at some point convicted of prostitution, soliciting, or loitering to solicit prostitution. So they have to have one of those commercial sex charges as a conviction on their record. Then they have to show the connection between every charge they're applying for and the trafficking. So for example, they were taught to steal items that would then be resold by the person who was trafficking them, or they were taught to lie to police. Now they have theft and obstruction charges. All of that, you have to show how it's related. And then ultimately there's a balancing test. Are their interests in the expungement greater than the interests of the state in keeping the record? So they must be doing something to be doing well to show that they're living a law-abiding, positive life. If that can happen, they can apply for a true, complete expungement, and those records can be totally destroyed. And we've had clients who have had 13 cases, 14 cases, 40 cases, 100 cases, and they're completely gone. That's just how human trafficking can be. It can be a very, very long record. There's also a $50 cost in the law for the expungement application, which again can be waived if a person is not able to pay it.
You have to submit some type of a poverty affidavit or something of that nature.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
To my knowledge, the expungement cases for survivors of trafficking have mostly happened in Cincinnati, Columbus, a few up in Toledo. I'm not sure if the courts here in this area have seen those cases very much. OJPC is involved in those expungement cases, so certainly if somebody listening thinks that they might have eligibility for this type of expungement, they should contact OJPC.
Yeah, now someone listening intently to what you said tonight about contacting OJPC, maybe finding a clinic that's being conducted by OJCP in the greater Cincinnati area, they might say, well, do your lawyers come up to Montgomery County? And I've heard that question come up in the past. So do you want to address that issue briefly tonight? And,
Absolutely.
And explain the limitations and all. Go ahead.
So if it is, an expungement for the survivor of sex trafficking. We will travel for that more often. We sometimes travel for record sealing, but here there's actually some places a person might look locally, and that's something we talk about now or at the end of the show, but there are some local potential opportunities for a person to get record sealing assistance. OJPC is probably the best place to go if you have records in Cincinnati or in the greater Cincinnati area. If you have some general questions about record sealing, we can provide people here in Dayton with some pro se guidance or try to connect them to an attorney up here. But I would say for expungements of the sort that I described for survivors of sex trafficking, that's one place I can be more confident we would travel up.
Okay. Well, since we're on that, let's briefly get through that, and I'll go first in conjunction with what we discussed earlier. So I reached out to the folks at Legal Aid of Western Ohio, and I was advised and spoke with a very fine gentleman there about the circumstances under which these types of issues might be addressed in the Dayton area for those, particularly those who cannot afford to hire their own attorney. A gentleman there, Pendra Patel, is a senior attorney with Legal Aid of Western Ohio, LAWO, it is an acronym. He explained to me that right now they have a grant, and individuals who are eligible to speak with an attorney at LAWO, and particularly Mr. Patel, would be only those currently who are referred by one of the agencies under the grant. And in this greater Dayton area, that would be Daybreak, Goodwill, Easter Seals of the Miami Valley, the East End Community Services, Omega Community Development Corporation, and the Miami Valley Urban League. So if you are receiving services from one of those organizations, for instance, and you have an issue such as what we've discussed this evening, you may then be able to contact Legal Aid of Western Ohio. And we usually have their number up on the screen. I'm not sure if we have that this evening. They have a very good website also. If you just Google Legal Aid of Western Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, or LAWO / ABLE Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, all in Dayton, Ohio. There are other offices throughout the state. And up will come their website, and they'll give you some more specific information on how to contact them. But there's a phone number very easily that will come to your attention. It'll be a screening number. I think it's an 888 number. So that's one avenue. It's limited. There also would potentially be private lawyers that might do this kind of work. I would just offer that you want this, you can see if you've been listening intently, that this is very detailed work. And it requires someone who really knows something about it. So it's really important that you make a good search if you're going to seek out counsel. Now, Sasha's also looked into this also for the Dayton area. Go ahead.
Yes, so I understand that there is also some assistance that comes through CAP. Now help me with the acronym.
CAP is a community action partnership here in Dayton, and
yeah, so
they have counsel there.
There's an attorney at CAP, and I understand that if there are agency referrals, so if you're working with an organization that then contacts CAP and says that you need assistance with record sealing or expungement, that CAP can provide that assistance with their attorney, and also that starting in March, they're going to be doing, offering assistance for people who reach out directly to them, not just through an agency referral. Also, it's possible for a person to file pro se, meaning on their own. If you go to OJPC's website, we have some resources to help a person gauge their own eligibility, both for record sealing and for expungement. We'll talk about CQEs. That's another application a person can file that way too.
Okay. Probably we should move in that direction. We have a little over 6 minutes here. No other calls right now that I'm aware of, but if there's not anything else you wanted to talk about under the topic of expungements. Nope. Go ahead, please.
All right. So in Ohio, there are certificates of qualification for employment. This is a certificate you can get from the court. and it's useful in a few situations. Generally, CQEs come up when a person can't hide or erase their record. So if they're not eligible for expungement, it's not a juvenile record, not a human trafficking related record, they can't seal their record, or if they can seal their record, they're trying to become a nurse or a social worker, or they're working in construction, but they often work on sites at nursing homes and schools. They're working the kind of fields where they get fingerprinted for that job or that site or that professional license, so they can't hide the record. That's where CQEs come in. And a CQE has two effects. First, very importantly, certificates of qualification for employment remove those mandatory barriers that prevent a person from working. So there are 1,000 laws in Ohio that limit what a person with a criminal record can do. 600 to 700 of them impact employment. If you have a CQE, if there is a law that says you cannot work in a nursing home, that law no longer applies to you. If it says you cannot work in a daycare, that law does not apply to you. So those.
If you are ultimately issued a CQE.
Yes, if you are issued a CQE, what it does is it takes those mandatory barriers and essentially makes them discretionary. So the employer can still choose to hire you or not, but they're now allowed to hire you. So that's the first thing it does. It removes those barriers in the law. The second thing that a CQE does is it creates what's called immunity from negligent hiring liability for the employer. And I'll explain that in simple terms. The number one reason that employers run background checks is they're worried that they themselves will get sued if something goes wrong in the future. If I hire you and you have a theft conviction, and then a customer or a client of mine gets something stolen, they might sue me saying, well, you're hiring people who you know have committed theft. I could be liable as the employer. But if you have a CQE, not only are there no legal barriers to my hiring you, but also I'm completely immune from negligent hiring liability. The state has stamped you as safe, and therefore there's no laws that prevent you from working, and nobody can get sued for having hired you.
Very, very important. Now we have another caller here. I'd like to get back to that. We're down to about 3.5 minutes, but caller, please, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Okay.
Well, Happy New Year to you.
Okay. Good to speak with you, sir.
We've enjoyed your conference with your guests and been very informative.
Okay.
I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is, assuming a person has had the record sealed or expunged, and they are inquired whether they have any convictions, can they legitimately say, I have no conviction?
If a person has had their record expunged, they can legitimately say, I have no records, and nothing should pop up in any circumstance. If a person has had their record sealed, they still have the legal right to mark, no, I don't have a record. My recommendation is if they're applying for a position where that record will still come up, for example, they're a nurse, healthcare provider's fingerprint, they'll be able to see it. I recommend marking, no, I don't have a record, and then writing, it has been sealed. As a general rule, while you have the legal right to mark no, if you know it's going to come up, it tends to be better in the employment conversation to have been upfront about it.
Now, mystery caller, I did not identify you. I don't know if you identified yourself, so we'll go on that basis. How did that?
Identify myself, but I can.
Well, I would be honored if you would do so. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, you guess.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Monta, the former host and producer of this show, a gentleman who's been the host up until 4 months ago of this show for over 25 years. An outstanding job along with all the volunteers and staff of DATV to make this possible for the community on a public service basis. So, Michael, I hope all is well with you and Happy New Year, and thank you for that question. Now, you said you had another question.
Well, I do have another question. I don't know if if I got on top of you there, but
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead. Don't ask about my socks, okay? I know.
which are very colorful.
As I wear them, as you know, every month, my dog's picture.
The second thing was, Sasha am I talking over you?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. Sasha indicated that in certain circumstances, these records can be completely erased or destroyed, and the question I think your viewers might be interested in is, let's say they lapse back into a life of crime and commit another, do those get revived?
Expunged records that are completely destroyed do not get revived. That's why if you're getting an expungement as a survivor of sex trafficking, there's that balancing test where you have to show your interest in the expungement outweighs the state's interest in keeping the record. Part of showing that is essentially saying, I have no chance of going back to a life where I'm going to commit an offense, and if I were to ever commit a crime, it would be so completely unrelated to this that you don't need to keep these records. So expunged records do not get revived.
Mr. Monta, does that answer your question?
That answers my question, and I hope it does for your viewing public also.
Okay.
Again, you're doing fine work, and you've had some fine guests on.
Well, thank you. And big shoes to fill here, my friend. Big shoes to fill. I got a long way to work on that. Happy, healthy New Year to you and your family. And thank you for calling.
Bye.
Okay. Good night. I'm a little unsure as to whether we have to wrap it up now. Okay, we're going to wrap things up, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very important subject, and the information provided tonight is by a very important person, Sasha Naiman from the Ohio Justice and Policy Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. I refer you again to their website, the website for the Dayton Bar Association, Loyal Referral Service, DATV. For this will be on YouTube probably within the next few days or next week. If you have only seen part of the show, or you want to refer others to watch this show and learn from the very informative information provided by Sasha. I thank you very much, Sasha, for being here, and hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone. Good night, and thank you.